Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this question and answer event on our Reinvent Performing Arts Fund. Like a number of other initiatives we have taken in the last year, it hopefully responds directly to the pandemic and the needs it has created for grantees and the wider sector. We're really pleased so many of you could join us today. My name is John Mulligan. I'm the Director of Creative Confident Communities and Fairer Future. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Alison Holdham.
Hi, I'm Alison Holdham. I'm the Lead Grant Funding Manager for Arts, Culture and Creativity.
We're also joined today by our colleagues, Gillian and Luna, who are going to be in the background and will be helping with the questions. Two tasks was too multitask for certainly me. For accessibility, we will also give an audio description now of ourselves and where we are. I am a slim, or skinny, if you prefer, grey-haired man in his mid-50s who has just had his first haircut in 6 months. I'm sitting in my living room and doing my best to keep my 7-year-old out. Over to you, Al.
Thanks, John. I'm a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I am also sitting in my living room, which has a brown sofa and a white wall behind me.
Just a few brief details on the practicalities before we start. We've got live captioning today, and it's available by clicking the closed captioning or CC button at the bottom of your screen. And as part of that, we'd like to thank AI Media for providing those live captions today. Luna is putting details of the link in the chat function now. In terms of the questions that you might want to pose, you can post those at any point during the session, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. And in the interest of democracy, we'd like to encourage you to vote for questions that have been submitted by other people, if you'd really like that one answered. And again, you can do that by clicking on the thumbs up icon next to the question. We're recording this webinar and we'll be sharing a link to it tomorrow. You'll probably have seen the dedicated page on our website, as well as read what was contained in the letter inviting you to apply to the fund. However, before diving into the question and answer session, we'll take the opportunity to give you a quick overview of the background to the fund and what we're trying to do with it. Over to Al for that overview, and then we'll get straight into the questions.
Thanks, John. So this fund is part of our ongoing response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it aims to support current grantees working in professional performing arts and to provide a boost to your existing plans for reopening. We've heard about the many impressive ways our grantees have adapted during the pandemic to reimagine the way they work and how they engage with audiences, but we also know how challenging that's been and how challenging it's been for organisations, and especially freelancers working in performing arts, due to lost ticket income, lost commissions, and the additional challenges you now have while trying to reopen the venues, including providing reassurance to audiences and testing models for social distancing. So this fund is specifically supporting professional work with audiences, which involves freelancers and strengthens diversity, equity and inclusion. The fund, which is in addition to our regular funding, commits an extra 1.5 million, and it's to help existing plans to reopen and to deepen the impact of that work as you're carrying it out. We really hope that what we learn from this, about this way of funding, as well as about the work funded, we can help to disseminate and inform future practice, as well as supporting diversity in the sector. If you're here today, you're one of those 100 organisations who are able to apply to the fund. And that means you currently have or have recently been supported by us, and you're engaged in professional performing arts, either as a producer, a programmer or a venue. So we have opted to make about 35 to 40 grants through this £1.5 million fund. The average size will be around 37,500, but grants can range from between 10,000 and 60,000, so your applications can be within that range. The money must be spent within the next 18 months. It really is about the reopening and about what's going to happen over the next 18 months of all our lives and our plans. We've aimed to make the process as light touch as possible, It's 3 questions over 2 sides of A4, and we really encourage you to use extracts of existing applications or of your strategic or business plans rather than writing an entirely new application. It's all done online through some boxes and questions that you can answer online. We aim for it to be as quick as possible. As you know, the deadline is the 17th of May, and we appreciate that doesn't give you a huge amount of time, but we felt it was really important to get the money spent as soon as possible. We will also aim to be as quick as we can, and we will make decisions by the 30th of June at the latest. There's going to be no formal reporting for this fund, but as you're all current or recent grantees, you will probably be including this work in your annual reports and your end of grant reports. There are 3 key criteria, and we will be assessing all applications against these 3 criteria. The work should be inventive. It should build on learning from the impact of the pandemic. It should be useful, so that it should offer potential learning for other organisations in the sector, and it should be useful for you to have a lasting difference to the way you work. And it should be more widely beneficial, so it should support and employ freelancers and strengthen your commitments to diversity, equity and inclusion. It should support the audiences and communities you serve. So those are the 3 points that we will be really looking at carefully in all the applications. And I'll hand back to John, and we can start answering some of your questions.
Thanks, Alison. Just before the questions, just to possibly reduce anxieties on both sides of the screen, we will be addressing the questions which we don't have time, if there are any, if we don't have time to answer them all today. So if you post a question in the chat function and we don't get to it today, that will appear on the web page that we dedicate to the webinar tomorrow. In terms of the way we're going to deal with this, Luna will be monitoring, along with Gillian, the questions that are posted, and we'll be addressing them in 3s to Alison and myself. So without further ado, and to give everybody as much time as possible to ask their question, it's over to you, Luna, for some questions which have come in advance of the session.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. So we are going to kick off with a few questions around application and eligibility first. So I'm going to ask 3 questions and then leave it to the panel to answer those as a group before going to the next questions. So question number 1, does the proposal need to address all 3 criteria in order to be eligible? Question number 2, can you apply if you have another application pending for the main funding, for our main fund? Question 3, can you apply if you've begun lead conversations, if it is for a piece of work that would fit this fund?
Alison, could I go over to you initially for those?
I'm so sorry, even after a year, I'm still muting myself. Sorry, Lily, could you say what the first one was again?
So does the proposal need to address all 3 criteria to be eligible?
It does, yes. Obviously, the applications will address the 3 to different degrees, but there has to be some consideration of all 3 points in any application, yes.
The second one, sorry. The second one was, can you apply if you have another application pending for our regular funding?
You absolutely can, yes. If you are in the process of applying to our main fund, particularly if you're applying for extension funding, it's absolutely fine. This fund is completely additional.
And then the next question was, can you apply if you've begun lead conversations?
Again, yes, you can. If it's for extension funding, then yes, absolutely.
Okay, shall I just do them one by one?
Sorry, yeah,
yeah, that's okay.
I think we've probably bitten off more than we can chew. 3 questions in our mind. So yeah, one by one, Luna. Let's go back to basics.
All right, that's great. So one of the items you can consider applying to the fund for is underwriting small audiences. How would we go about evidencing that request, and how would any submission we make for it be assessed?
Shall I take that one?
Oh, could you go back for that one? Thanks, Al.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think obviously there's not a huge amount of words for you to use here. So I think what we would really just need to understand is this a different approach for you with audiences? Is it new people? Is it a different way of engaging with existing audiences? We just need to understand what's different. So a little bit about your existing work and a little bit about what's different. We won't need any more detailed evidence because we haven't given you the space to do that. It's just really understanding the difference would be the key thing there.
Great. Just moving on to a few budget related questions. Will this funding be treated as restricted or unrestricted?
Well, we're trying to we're trying to make sure that we impose as few restrictions on people as possible. So we will be treating all grants as unrestricted funds. We'll come to a couple of questions on the budget, but certainly within the accounts and in terms of any reporting back to us, we are treating the funds as unrestricted.
How detailed does the budget need to be, and would co-funding be any confirmed income towards the areas of work asking to be supported?
If it's a separate self-contained project, we'd need to know the total amount and the detail of any partnership funding or match funding that you have. If it's a contribution towards your core work as part of your plans for reopening, we'd need the total cost of programming for the year or the season. If you have specific funding to help you reopen your main programme, e.g. through the government's Cultural Recovery Fund, we would need to know that as well. I think the main point is we want the money from this fund to be used as soon as you need it. We won't require you to have the project or programme fully funded, but we do need to know that our funding will either enable the work to take place or make a contribution towards the impact of work which is already funded or mostly funded.
Fab. Will we need to see a budget prior to releasing the funding, since the application form doesn't request one?
No, is the answer. We only need a total for the work and details of any other funders, as I say, who are involved in supporting the work. We're not asking for details of the expenditure. As I said, we want to make the application processes light touch and ideally piggyback off applications that you've made elsewhere.
Will you either fund the entire ask or not at all, or are you open to funding part of the proposed ask?
I think the answer to the previous question probably helps out with this one. We're definitely open to both suggestions that we fund the entire project or programming costs up to a maximum of £60,000. But equally, we're very interested and open to applications which has one or more match funders in place.
And how much of the match funding in the proposal needs to be confirmed at application stage?
I don't think we want to penalise people specifically for having match funding in place, but I think in making decisions on that, I think bear in mind the scale of what you've got planned. Obviously, if we are a small piece in a much larger jigsaw, then the amount of detail and the amount of certainty of that match funding needs to be in place, because what we don't want to do is make a grant of £60,000 where the total costs may be 300 and very little of that has actually been secured. So I think we'll be making decisions on a case-by-case basis and taking scale as probably the biggest factor in determining how certain that additional funding is in coming through.
I'm just going to pick out a budget related question from the Q&A. Is it an all or nothing approach to funding? You mentioned an average of 37,500, but can you apply for up to 60,000?
Yes, there is the potential to apply for 60,000, but I think the way we would prioritize in our assessment would be against those criteria and possibly particularly the the relevance of what the model generates in terms of learning and lessons that can be kind of taken on board or replicated elsewhere in the sector. So the higher the bid, the more we will probably look for impact in terms of the project.
So I'm just going to move to the last few questions that we received in advance before we go on to the Q&A question, the questions that are being asked now. Does ESME want to be the main funder of one single project, or are we happy to give a valuable contribution to a set of projects linked to the reopening?
I take that one.
Oh yes, thanks, Al.
Yeah. That's either way is absolutely fine. If there's one particular project that you really want to do as part of your reopening that you can't do because you haven't got the funding, and it's something that can be done for up to 60,000, then we're happy to look at that. If, however, you know that in amongst the other funding you've got, there's a piece of your plan that you're just not able to do because of the lack of up to 60,000, then we're more than happy for you to apply for that piece of a much bigger program. And it can in fact be a piece of your whole annual program or your whole seasonal program. Providing it meets the criteria and it's something that's really come as a response to the pandemic and to the issues around reopening. And again, as John said, providing that the majority of the funding is there for you to do the work that sits around that small piece.
What relationship would ESME like to see between the activity this fund covers and the activity ESME is already funding? Can it be a development of the work that if it fits the criteria, or should it be separate?
It can be either. If we're supporting your core costs or your unrestricted costs, and this is a particular project, that's absolutely fine. If we're funding, say, for example, your participation work, and what you want to apply for this fund is a piece of audience-facing work, that's also fine. I think what we're really interested in is how it helps you as an organisation to thrive in the next 12 to 18 months, and it doesn't have to be related to what else we're funding you for. It's about the organisation doing well in the next 18 months, regardless of whatever we fund you for currently.
Great. And the last question we got in advance is, what relationship would you like to see between activity delivered over 2020 and this funding? For example, if we piloted something that fits the criteria, can this fund be a way to continue and develop it? Or would you like to see a new project inspired by this learning?
Again, that can be either. If it's a new project that's inspired by something that you've done that will be the next step in something you've done, or that is continuing something that you've already started, either of those is absolutely fine, providing the root of it is in what's happened to you in the last 18 months and the impact of it is going to be experienced during the 18 months. It's more a question of just it being really a response to the pandemic.
Right, moving on to the questions and the Q&A. Sorry, John, did you want to say something?
Well, just Luna, if anybody wants kind of further clarification on some of the answers we've already given, don't feel constrained. Just follow up on some of the answers. If we haven't given enough detail or if what we've said is ambiguous, please feel free to follow up in the chat.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. So some of the more popular questions, what proportion of each grant award would you want to see going directly out to freelancers? Alison, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really set a point about the budget or but what we would expect is that whatever work we're being asked to support in some way would benefit freelancers, so that some element of it would be commissioning or would be employing freelancers in some way. So I think we would not, for example, we would not do something that was focused entirely on existing internal staff and that didn't have any freelance engagement with it at all, but we haven't put a percentage in it. We just really want some of this money to reach freelancers, basically.
I think the point about freelancers and diversity, equity, inclusion isn't that the whole plan has to focus on those two things, but I think all the plans will be monitored and looked at to make sure that proper consideration is given to those themes. I think it's important that they are very much integral to the plans that you've got.
And just sticking with freelancers for the moment, can freelancers include technical staff, so not just artists?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Great, nice and quick. Another quick question, hopefully. So will the 12 to 18 months start from the 1st of July after decisions are made?
Yes, I think that's true, isn't it, Alison?
Yeah, yeah.
So just a few questions on the eligibility criteria. Can you elaborate more on it needs to be useful? What are the general areas that we would need to focus on to address this point?
Alison, could you take that one, please?
Yeah, sure. I think what we mean by that is that it's two parts really. One is that it either it's useful to you as an organization. So it's something that will be useful to your future plans, that it's going to be to provide you as an organization or the people that you're working with or the freelancers you're engaging with learning that is going to help them in the future, whatever the new normal is, or the next 18 months. On the other hand, what we're really keen to do through these grants is to gather a group of, or to gather the information from a group of organizations who are experiencing this point of reopening and of recovering from the pandemic. And we would hope to be able to use that learning to disseminate it to the rest of the sector. And so that's the kind of thing we're looking for, is how, if it's going to benefit you, that's fine. If it just benefits you, if it benefits you, but it also has learning that the rest of the sector could potentially use or could potentially benefit from, that we can disseminate out to them, then that would be really a good match with the priorities.
There's a question on also just clarifying what we mean by existing plans.
I think what we're saying here, and Al, please come in if I'm wrong, is that what we want to avoid are people simply responding to the fund without necessarily having some plans in place that they're working to as they look to reopen. I think that much of this also revolves around the learning that's been acquired as a result of the pandemic, and the adaptations people have made as a result. And I suppose carrying those through into what Al describes as the new normal. How do we make the best of the ingenuity, the imagination, the innovation that you have all applied to the task of keeping things on the road, and actually mainstreaming and making that integral to your work for the future. So I think if you haven't got any plans for reopening, I suggest this isn't the fund for you. But Al, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to say that by existing, we don't mean that it has to be something you're 2 weeks away from opening and doing, which you may be. Some of the things that you're doing now, you'll be 2 weeks away from opening. But if it's something you're thinking, post July, August, maybe when we go into the autumn and you can't do outdoor events, how do you think about that? If there's plans that you have that are thinking about what's going to happen over the next year, but you have fairly certain plans about, that's the sort of thing we're looking at. If you have the plans and you're thinking, if we had the money, we could just do this extra piece, or going into the autumn, we could shift something so that we could do it this way. That's the kind of thing we mean by existing. But equally, if you've got something you're doing in 2 weeks' time that needs more funding in order to have a really long lasting impact and to reach other people and to really reach your audience, that we can look at as well. So it's a combination, it's two things, but it has to be something that's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. And as John was saying, what we're trying to say here is it's not a fund for people to think, well, I've always wanted to do this, so I'm going to go and apply for this money. It's really about what are you doing and how are you moving now as a result of the pandemic, not something that you've always wanted to do in the past but never had the funding to do. It's really about the response to the pandemic in the next 18 months.
And could you clarify, please, what you mean by supports the audiences and communities you serve? Can those communities be artist communities, or does this need to have a public engagement element?
Alison, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it should be audience facing in some way. Obviously, if that help, if it's benefiting communities of artists, because they're doing the work, fine. But and if it's engaging your communities because they are experiencing your work in a different way, then that's fine. What it excuse me, what it isn't is kind of participatory work. It's not that sort of thing. It's much more about audience-facing engagement work.
And on that point,
it's probably just worth, sorry, Luna,
that's okay,
worth adding that this fund was we'd originally designed it to encompass all our grantees in the portfolio who are working in the arts sector, and that we have narrowed that now to organisations in the performance arts, so programmers, producers, and venues. And I think to depart from any element of audience-facing plans would probably go back on that on that redesign, and wouldn't be fair on the organisations that we didn't actually invite through.
And will you consider applications for digital work, or is there a preference for live work with live audiences?
We're really agnostic on that one. I mean, we're very interested in the way in which the sector can future-proof, for want of a better word, the work that they do. A lot of people have a lot more experience on digital than they did 12 months ago. And that's very much the area that we're anticipating applications to be, but we're certainly not focusing exclusively on that. We're looking at ways of, we're looking at practice, we're looking at models, we're looking at platforms which people have used more over the past 12 months and would like to sustain and grow.
Okay, just going back to the Q&A questions. What would the appropriate percentage of core funding included in the budget be? And can this be increased if it's directly applicable to the project, i.e. paying for artistic staff time as well as paying freelancers?
I think on that one, I think it's very much, if it makes sense in the context of the work that's planned. There are no hard and fast rules on that. For me, and I don't know whether Alison agrees, if it's all core staff work, but it meets the outcomes, then we're not going to second guess that. And I think we'd be, if it makes sense and it's consistent with the plans, then we're not going to specify whether it comes from one pot or another. Al, have you? Is that...
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have part of this fund is we are aiming for some of this fund to reach freelancers because we know how much they need it. But if actually that's just not practical for what you want to do, and actually what you need to do is underpin internal in-house artistic costs or in-house technical costs, and that's, if you can make that case, then that's fine. Obviously we are hoping that a substantial number of the grants we make will reach freelancers, but if you can make a really strong case that you match the other two criteria, but actually what you need to do as an organisation is to shore up your internal technical and artistic staff, then we can certainly look at that, providing it meets all the other criteria.
And I suppose the only rider I would put on that is if you have worked routinely with freelancers in the past and are looking to in the future, then not to have freelancers within those plans wouldn't be marked down. But I think including them would certainly prioritise the application.
Can people apply for restaging of a performance which got cancelled last year due to COVID?
Alison, do you want to put that one?
Yeah, yes, providing you can show, I suppose, what impact that cancellation has had, if there's something you're having to do differently, or if there's some difference in audience or something. I think that's fine, providing we understand what's happened during the pandemic, how it's been affected. But yeah, there's no reason, it doesn't have to be new work. Across the board, it doesn't have to be brand new work. It just has to be work that has been, the delivery of which, or the way in which you are doing your work has been affected by the pandemic.
a few more clarifications. Can you clarify on the all or nothing question? If a bid was for 60,000, but you didn't feel that it achieved that level of impact, would you be open to giving a smaller amount, or would you just reject the bid?
I think we wouldn't have any immediate declines. I think that's the important thing to bear in mind. And I think just a word on how these are going to be assessed. They're going to be initially assessed by members of the team, and then 2 stages of consultation between the people who have been involved in the programme. So there is plenty of opportunities to kind of, weigh the pros and cons of different proposals. I think ultimately, like assessment generally, we will assess whether we get value for money, and whether the project produces that kind of impact for the size of the grant. But there is nothing to stop us from making a smaller offer if we can be sure the work will be carried out to a high standard, with or without match funding in place.
Could you clarify what you mean by inventive? Because inventive in Blackpool might mean something very different to inventive in Bristol. How will you decide if it meets your criteria?
Alison, do you want to have a go at that?
I guess the first thing is inventive for you, inventive for the art form. So I suppose this really is about what you've learned during the pandemic about the way you do things and what you want to change. So it's really, that's what it's really about. When we say inventive, what we really mean is, what have you learned about the way that you work as a result of the pandemic, and how are you shifting? Or when you look forward to the reopening process and the getting audiences back, how are you being inventive around doing that? What are you having to do that's different from your previous way of working in order to get those audiences back and to serve them in the way that you can best serve them? So it's about what is it that the pandemic has caused you to do that is different from business as usual, or how it has been.
And there's a question here about whether the learning has to be COVID related, whilst lots of organisations have been learning as a result of dealing with COVID. There is also, for instance, a new determination to be an anti-racist organisation. Can a bid relate to work that an organisation wants to do that isn't COVID related? So it's not COVID related specifically.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're talking about the pandemic, but actually it's about everything that has been brought to light by the pandemic in the last 18 months. So yes, absolutely. And that's why we've got a part of the criteria is about commitments to diversity, equity and inclusion as well. So yes, if it's a response, if your work is in response to those issues that have been raised over the last year or amplified over the last year, then absolutely yes. Yeah,
I think that I'm really pleased that question came up, because the guidance may well lead people to believe that we're very much looking at the practical steps to improving services, whenever the last year has been, as Alison says, has been pivotal in kind of making us all think afresh about how we deliver for whom. So attitudes and commitments on DEI very much in our thinking in terms of what we fund in this fund.
And I think also, a lot of the reasons why we're doing this is because we've seen such amazing work happening, and we've got a couple of examples of people coming to us for funding for things that they're doing, and it's not absolutely in response to COVID, it's not in response to social distancing, for example, or it's not in response to reopening the venues. It's actually because people have had to work in a different way, and they've realised something about the way they're working, or they've realised something they want to try that they've never tried before, that reaches different audiences or engages with people in a different way. So it's not sort of specifically about the social distancing or about the reopening, but it's about the fact that this period has taught people something or has opened the opportunity to work in a different way, and people want to move on that. So that's the sort of thing that we're really interested in. What has it made you think about, and what are you going to be doing differently?
For multi-arts venues and organisations, can a proposal focus on a specific area of work rather than general reopening? And how specific are you about the term performing arts? Would multimedia exhibition with a live art element fall into this?
I think yes and yes is the quickest way to answer that. But my guiding principle to everybody is that if you've been invited, then don't worry about the art form. I think that's the message, because you as our grantees have already in that respect satisfied us that you fit the criteria. So in terms of specific, yes, I mean there's absolutely no problem in identifying a very discrete, self-contained piece of work which you'd like to advance, as long as it satisfies those three criteria. Does it, for example, generate the kinds of lessons that a multi-arts venue somewhere else in the country would say, oh, that's quite interesting, or that's really interesting. Let's see if we can adapt some of that. I think those are the kinds of questions that you probably need to ask yourselves before putting the application in.
Thank you. And by reopening, do you expect this to be focused on work in public venues, for example, theatres, or will you consider work in other venues, such as hospices, schools, provided there is an audience?
Alison, do you want to?
Yes, I mean, the schools one's slightly tricky because if it's part of your normal cultural education output, possibly not, because that would be more of the usual thing to do. But if it's something about working in different spaces, for example, outdoor work or different venues, then yes, we could certainly look at that. Again, it would have to be different to how you've worked before, or it would have to be in building on the way you worked before in something that you've learned over the last year.
I think sometimes the change in the venue may very well be the thing that makes it interesting, I suppose. So I think we'd be open to it, but as Alison says, I think working schools just as an extension of the work you've traditionally done probably doesn't satisfy at least one or possibly all of the three criteria.
So there's a couple of questions here around what we mean engaging like audiences and the distinction between participatory work. So one here, can you define direct delivery to audiences? Can this include supporting artists to make or program work that reaches audiences? Can it include participatory work?
Alison, do you want to have a first go at that?
Yes, I mean it is more audience facing. So I think if it's a participatory practice that is really about co-creation without an audience, then it's unlikely. If it's about a participatory project that has an audience focus to it, then it's a possibility. If you're commissioning an artist to work towards a participatory project that has a significant performance element to it, then yes, we could look at that. But if it doesn't, no, I don't think so. I think it would have to have something that's got a really distinct performance element, audience element to it.
Great. So it's not, it can be participatory, but it does have to have an audience engaging and audience facing element to it. Fantastic. Thank you. How should we approach the situation of proposing a project for the fund which currently has another live funding application for the full costs, but which we are unlikely to hear back on before your deadline?
I think like any application, it's absolutely fine for you to continue applying to us. But I think like the other funder involved, we'd just like to be told if news comes through. So if you've got it lodged with another funder and you're successful in this fund, we just ask you to notify the other funder that this has happened.
Yeah, because this fund we're trying to make this fund light touch and quick. So the odds are that if their decision is after our decision, you would get the money from us more quickly, because we want to release the money really quickly after the decision's been made, or as quickly as we can after the decision's been made. So yeah, as John says, providing, we would expect you to tell the other funder that you've got it. But no, there's no reason otherwise.
By freelancers, do you also mean freelance staff?
Existing freelance staff, does that mean, or?
I'm not really sure. I guess you've got freelance artists, technical staff, technical freelancers. So I don't know if this is more about the running of an organisation. Perhaps this is somebody who's asked anonymously. So if they could maybe come back about their question.
I think the permanence of the freelance member of staff is the continuity of their engagement, if not employment, with the organization is probably pivotal, because the kinds of people that we're interested in here are people who've really suffered through cancellation of multiple contracts, and who rely for their living on multiple clients and multiple venues. If people are employed or engaged even on a freelance basis for 9 months of the year with one organization, I suspect that's a different case, and I suspect that if that's the freelancer, then that wouldn't be kind of the focus of the work that we would support.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I stress the point before is that I think the DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and freelancers, it doesn't have to be absolutely exclusively focused on them, but they need to figure in the plans. If you have traditionally, certainly if you, on the freelance point, if you've traditionally engaged freelancers, then they need to be part of this.
Great, thank you. There's a question here that's just disappeared from my list. It's from Paul. Would you like to see contingency plans in applications if the work planned is not possible due to future changes and social distancing restrictions, i.e. digital capture?
No, I don't think we need contingency plans, because of the level of funding involved, because of the speed with which we want to get the money out. We really want to work as quickly as possible. And I suppose if we look at a proposal and there's huge amounts of unacceptable risk that runs through it, then the likelihood is it'll be declined if there's too many risks attached to it. But for a fairly standard proposal which incorporates plans which meet the criteria, otherwise we will certainly not be second guessing the success or feasibility of it.
No, and all the people on this call will be current or recent grantees, and that the way we've tried to manage the grants during the last year has been to be very, very flexible, because we appreciate that you really building contingencies in at the moment is really, really difficult. So we wouldn't expect that.
Thank you. How would you hope that this fund complements an organisation's future resilience, economically, culturally, etc.?
Al, do you want to have a crack?
How would we expect it?
How would you expect? Sorry, I've already moved the questions.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I can't find it now.
I suppose really, how is the point up to you, really? I think we'd just be interested to know how you think it's going to move you forward. It can be economically, it can be artistically, it can be in terms of community engagement or audience or community engagement, or it could be in terms of the art form. I think it's really what we need to, I think the thing that's going to make the difference to us is to see what you think the difference will be. You know, how will this move you forward? What will that movement be? And how will it have a longer term impact on you as an organisation? You know, does it put in place some way of testing something that could become central to the way you work in future, or does it put in place some foundations for something that you can build on as things go, become more, we all become more resilient, and you know, there's more reliability about planning. It's that it can be whatever you feel is the right thing that's going to really make the difference to you.
Another question asking for clarification about audiences and learning participation work. Are you therefore only looking to fund performance work for paying audiences and not interested in examples performances for schools?
It doesn't have to be paying. I mean, if it's free work, that's absolutely fine. We're not looking necessarily just for the economic, to sort of underwrite economic costs. So it could be free work that you're doing. The schools work we'd be unlikely to do, I have to say, because that's really for us considered under our cultural education section, and we haven't invited people into this fund who are exclusively cultural education organisations. So it wouldn't be fair really to then fund schools work through this fund, because we haven't invited the other sort of people that are only cultural education focused into this fund.
So related to that, if the work aims to reach young audiences through schools, so directly bypassing venue partners, but isn't average work with schools, essentially, will the very mention of schools be grounds for exclusion?
No.
Thanks.
I mean, it's a tricky one. I suppose my feeling, and this exposes the flaws in some of our speed in terms of getting this fund up in place, because some of these issues are quite tricky to come down on one side of the fence or the other. My feeling is that the mention of schools will not lead to an automatic decline, but I think that if we were to fund something which had as a focal point interaction with schools or children in schools, then we'd have to, the bar would be raised in terms of the learning and impact it would generate. And I think if you were looking at a platform or a method of performance in relation to schools work, which could be replicated across your other work, then that's the kind of thing that I think you know, would lead to us being interested. But straightforward delivery in schools, you know, is probably not for this fund, even if it's the first time for you.
We do appreciate that. Obviously, everybody is having to think very carefully about how they work in schools at the moment. But I just think this isn't quite the right fund for work that is exclusively in schools.
Thank you. If reshaping your cafe as part of your overall offer was part of your future plans, would reworking both the space and a programme within it be eligible, or just the programme?
In the cafe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't fund capital costs, so it wouldn't be about anything that was to do with reshaping it. I suppose, no, we would probably be mostly, in all honesty, we'd be mostly looking at the programming within it if you were going to do something like that. If you had to buy some pieces of equipment in order to do that, we could look at some of those smaller costs. If you had to employ staff in order to do it, we could look at those sorts of costs. So it's potentially wider, but it would all be focused on if you were programming work there, as opposed to what you were selling in it as a cafe situation.
Okay.
Luna, can I just jump in and remind?
Yes.
We've got about 6, 7, 8 minutes. So if you have got a question and you haven't had an answer to it yet, just make sure it's in the chat. As long as it's in the chat, it will be on.
Or in the Q&A function.
Oh, sorry, in the Q&A function. I knew I'd get that wrong at some point.
Yeah, any questions that we don't answer, we will get answers to you when we send the recording. So a few more that we can squeeze in. Just to clarify about the timeline, can you contribute to an overall project taking place over that 12 to 18 months where some work will have begun before the 1st of July?
Yes,
absolutely.
Okay. And on audiences, can the project target recovery for freelancers but with no immediate audience facing work? The implicit logic therefore being that freelance support would lead to work for public, but that's not immediate here.
I think if the ultimate destination is audience facing work, then I think that's fine. But I suppose using that 12 to 18 month timeline, I don't think we're looking at this making a difference to audience facing work on a 5-year time horizon. I think what we're looking for is evidence of the results of this work coming and benefiting audiences within the next 18 months and at the outside 2 years. So it's a medium-term horizon, not a long-term one.
Great, thank you. You don't ask for a specific budget. Would this help strengthen the application to see the context the project fits in? Given our ask would not be core, it would be towards the project so asking to see that as part of a budget table. Does that make sense?
What do you, yes.
Yeah, you can. I mean, we hadn't anticipated people attaching budgets simply because we were trying to make it as light touch as possible. If you feel that adding some more budget information would be really helpful, then you can put it into the box. But I don't think we really want to make anybody attach a separate budget just because that's more work for you. And I don't think everyone will be in the same position with that, because I think some people are applying for core costs, it would be a much more complicated thing for them to try and do. So if you wanted to put some more money in, I mean, that's why we've asked the question about other funders, because I know quite a few people have got money from emergency funds and that are helping them at this point. So perhaps, you know, that's why we've asked people to put that sort of information in rather than attaching a whole budget.
If we're already funding some of an organisation's core costs, can they apply for further core funding through this grant?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Fab. Is this part of our extension funding that has been referenced previously or additional? If it's additional, could we begin a conversation about extension funding now, as well as make an application to this Reinvent funding?
Yes, you can. This is entirely additional and separate, and you can talk to your funding manager about extension if you're within the last sort of 9 months of your current grant. That's absolutely the same process will carry on.
Thank you. On your answer, freelancers, can we apply for funds that won't directly pay freelancers, but will support a wider piece of work being able to happen, which ultimately supports or provides work to freelancers?
I think that's fine. Yep.
Yeah, just as long as you put that in the application and that in the application, that because you want Monday to do a certain thing that will eventually benefit freelancers, that's fine.
I think,
and I suppose the only other thing is be specific about those benefits. I think it's important if it's not tangible in the form of money, then it needs to be fairly tangible in terms of skills development, care, whatever that happens to be.
Thank you. On your answer, Ree, the all or nothing approach, could you clarify whether you might award less than requested by an applicant, which I think is yes. There was a question about a combination of types of audiences for live performing arts. So standard audiences, but also engaging community groups, which I think the answer was yes as well for that.
Just on that one, just Luna, on the one about, because we've been asked it a couple of times, you can apply for anything between 10 and 60,000, because unfortunately we are not going to be able to fund everybody. There may be a case where you put application in for 60, but you only get 40 or 30, or or whatever. We until we see how many applications we get, we don't really know, because it's a finite fund of 1.5 million. But yes, there's a possibility that you may put in for a certain amount and we may have to reduce it in our offer. And we will take into consideration, if we have to do that, we will take into consideration how much the project you would be able to achieve with that money, and or if it's a contribution to core costs, what impact that would have. But yeah, that is a possibility.
If the project radically challenges the old norms in terms of paying freelance artists and addresses diversity and inclusion in leadership, but takes longer to reach audiences because it's proposing new ways of working that take longer or more time to shift the ingrained ways of working, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you. And then should we just have one more question?
Maybe squeeze one more in, Luna.
I'll just do the top one. Can supporting freelancers involve placing them on salary? So offering new work to new freelancers, but in ways that mean they're no longer actually freelance?
I suppose yes to that principle. I suppose as long as it meets the three criteria. Is that inventive? Is the immediate question that probably begs, just by paying people who used to be freelancers. Is that enough for a venue in Aberdeen to say that's interesting? We must look at that.
Yeah. And does that have any learning for the rest of the sector, or does it help you as an organisation develop differently? If it does, then fine, but you'd have to answer those questions, or ask yourself those questions. Yeah.
And just quickly, I'll just quickly answer these ones because they're just really practical. Someone's asked where they can find the application form. If you were invited to apply, you should have your own link included in the invitation. So each organisation will have their own unique link to submit their request for funding. And the last question is, yes, we will be sharing a recording of this session. So I'm hoping we can get this out to everybody tomorrow. And I'll just add it to the website page so that the information is on as well. Is there anything else that you want to add, John, Al?
I suppose just we had this event in the hope that we'd kind of comprehensively deal with everybody's questions, and hopefully we've at least made a stab at that. And just to say, I suppose that given how busy everybody is, we'd welcome the fact that no further questions on the eligibility come through. Is that I think we'd appreciate that. And I think, I think just it remains for me to say, you'll have noticed through the session that I was fighting a losing battle with the sun in terms of the angle of my screen, giving me a nice sepia tint to it. But as you will have also seen, I kind of shamelessly passed on any questions that I couldn't answer to Alison, without whom this would have been a lot less comprehensive than hopefully it was. But thanks again to AI, thanks to Luna and Gillian in kind of dealing so efficiently with the questions, and also to Al, without whose expertise would always be lost. And thanks to you for taking the time out of your schedules to ask such really good questions of absolute, universal application. No question the answer to which wouldn't have been useful to lots of people on the call and viewing the webinar. So thanks for keeping all the questions really, really general and not specific to your own organizations. So with that, have a pleasant end of the day, and good luck with your applications if you're thinking of submitting. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.